Hello, I'm Julia George and this is the Sunday Politics in the South East. Coming up later, we'll be talking about the beautiful game and how both the political blues and reds want supporters to play a greater role in the running of their clubs.
From a fan's point of view, if you've got a multi-millionaire bankrolling you, it's great when the times are good. It's when they leave, when they've had enough, they walk away and someone's got to pick up the pieces.
Well, to talk about the beautiful game and all the political play of the autumn statement this week, I'm joined by two journalists turned politicians. Adam Holloway is the Conservative MP for Gravesham and Councillor Chris Oxlade will stand for Labour in the general election in Crawley. Nice to see you both. Now, we're going to start with the big political story of the week, the autumn statement. There was money for flood defences, road building and, of course, for the Kent, Surrey and Sussex ambulance, plus that eye-catching stamp duty announcement. Chris Oxlade, you've been outsmarted by the Tories, haven't you, when it comes to property tax? I wonder if you're even going to stick with the mansion tax now.
I wouldn't say that at all. I think with the stamp duty, anything that's going to help people, particularly in Crawley, with stamp duty is more than welcome. The big problem with it, of course, it's going to drive up house prices. And just on Thursday or Friday of last week, after the autumn statement, we're finding there's a lot of press reports. Estate agents are already hiking up prices. Now, this has been economic growth over the last few years on personal debt and house price rises.
But interestingly, if you look at a survey that was taken just before and just after the autumn statement, and this is looking at whether a Miliband-led Labour government would be more popular, specifically on the issue of housing. Would they help me get on the housing ladder? The Conservatives have gone up 11 percentage points. They're even pegging with you. This is popular.
Well, the Conservatives are playing catch-up with items we've already announced over the last few months. You know, the tax, the mansion tax, is going to work for basically ploughing money back into services that people desperately need. OK,
Adam Holloway, your top band of stamp duty would raise £154,000, give or take, on a house value between 2 and 3 million. There are plenty of those, of course, in the South East. But as Ed Balls has pointed out, 95% of people don't move house in any given year, so this isn't going to generate anything like as much as the mansion tax would.
What can I say? If he says so, sure. But I think the point, I actually agree with the first bit of what Chris said, that you know, it's hard enough for people to get on the property ladder. And on the one hand, you know, this does make it easier because they're not going to have to write what is a gigantic cheque really when you've just taken out a mortgage and people have saved for a deposit. But of course, you know, you have to balance that with rising property prices as well as a result. So it's a mixed thing, but I think anything that makes it easier for people, particularly, you know, in the more ordinary category of housing, the more normal categories, and I think that's a very good thing. But I mean, on the mansion tax, I mean, I think it's you know, it plays well politically, but you know, there are plenty of people, particularly in our cities, you know, who are not cash rich, but who are sitting on very valuable assets. You know, worth, you know, a couple of £1 million, but actually for something that, you know, they probably paid very, very much less for. I mean, my parents' house, for example, in South London, which they bought for, I think it was £1,300 in 1962, was recently sold by, you know, several owners later. But I think it sold for £2.7 million, and that's a terraced house, you know, in Vauxhall, next to a housing estate. OK,
but let's come back to what you described as the more ordinary people. Will the stamp duty thresholds rise, or should they rise with inflation or with house prices? Because this is clearly designed to be a tax on wealthier people, and the threshold is nearly £1 million for the highest rate. But in a few years, it becomes a tax on the middle classes, doesn't it?
Well, it depends. They may adjust it in a few years, who knows?
What about house building? This is the other thing that's talked about. After the announcement of a garden city at Ebbsfleet, another one at Bicester. For both of you, a question here on whether people can be persuaded to accept house building where they live. If you've got a home already, Chris Oxlade, people tend to say, I don't want any more built here, thanks.
Taking Crawley for an example, we've got a very, very small area to build on. We've already got the North East sector going into Crawley, which has got just over 2,000 homes going. We're guaranteeing a 40% affordable build on that. We've got to get more houses built. Labour's pledged to build 200,000 a year, and in Crawley, like I said, we're guaranteeing that the affordable section of that is going to be for Crawley people. What
about you, Adam Holloway? How do you resolve this eternal conundrum that if you've already got a house and you live in a nice area, you don't want any more house building?
Yeah, I was actually sitting with a friend of mine in Gravesend recently, and they're on a sort of relatively new sort of 60s housing development. They look over some beautiful rolling fields. And you know, at some point, maybe someone will try and build on those rolling fields. So you can completely understand why people are NIMBYs. You know, I'm kind of a NIMBY too. But the fact is, because we've had these very, very high levels of immigration, because we've had, you know, marital breakdown, because people are living much longer, we need a lot more houses. So that then comes a question of, you know, how we do it and where we put them. And certainly in North Kent, we have got an awful lot of post-industrial space that we ought to use. And we should also be thinking as well, you know, with the terrible decline of high streets in our towns and villages, about, you know, what we do with those old sort of retail premises. Well,
let's turn from home ownership to the 9 million people who rent. At any moment, you could be 8 weeks away from losing your home. According to the charity Shelter, last year, landlords evicted 2,122 tenants in the South East, a 55% increase since 2011. So why are so many private landlords kicking people out of their homes? Well, let's meet one of them. Fergus Wilson owns around 1,000 properties. Fergus, thank you for joining us. You've been busy, haven't you, evicting your tenants who receive housing benefit. Why?
Well, we haven't been that busy, not as busy as the media makes out. We've tried to do it humanely. The number have actually got to court have only been about 20. Most of them, we gave them the notice, they knew what was coming, and they negotiated somewhere.
But why? Why? What's your motivation?
Well, basically, we were finding people on benefits were just a category who were getting out of control in terms of defaulting on their rent. Now, it got so bad that we just couldn't continue.
So I think people could understand evicting somebody who is in arrears, but evicting somebody because they fall into a category that sometimes gets into arrears.
Well, the thing is this, that you have just said on there, it takes after 8 weeks you could find yourself homeless. In theory, the accelerated possession starts at 14 days if you've already served the notices. However, the reality is it can take up to 2 years.
But you're the one who chose to get rid of them. So less about the practicalities and more about the motivation, because you have also turned your attention to people on 0 hours contracts and large families. So, forgive me, but some people would really balk at what you're doing, especially as you're evicting people in some cases who are up to date with their rent, but just happen to fall into a category you don't like very much. Well, it sounds like social cleansing, Fergus.
Well, I'm sorry if it does sound like that, but it's not only myself. Apparently 82% of landlords do it, right, which means 18% don't. We take an economic view. It's nothing to do with personalities. I don't actually meet the tenants. Generally, I've never met them. They're put in by an agent, and
you take their money, don't you?
The agent takes their money on my behalf.
Doesn't keep it.
No. Let me finish. So basically, we take an economic view, like anybody running a business, like the Chancellor of the Exchequer. He takes a view on what's happening, and we find that people who have a rent guarantee do not default. I've not had one default for 1 penny in the last 2 years, yet an increasing number of people on benefits started defaulting. Now, I'm not actually saying it was their fault, so don't put those words into my mouth.
OK, let me ask you then, if you don't want them, who do you want? It's been said in the past, or you've said in the past, you're quite keen on Eastern Europeans as your sort of favourite tenant.
No. You've been misled if you think that's the case. We want people who are able to have a rent guarantee. That means if they default, we do not lose. We've got a guaranteed rent. So we don't care what colour they are, sexual orientation, what country they come from.
In what way would I bring a rent guarantee? Just because I'm working?
You may qualify. I don't know if you're on 0 hours or not. You may be only...
Let's not dwell on my contract.
But assuming you had a guaranteed income...
Yeah, but that's not the same as guaranteeing you're going to pay your rent, is it?
Don't make any difference to me. If I've got the guarantee and you don't pay the rent, I still get paid.
All right, let's bring in our politicians. Adam Holloway, what do you think of Fergus Wilson's decision to evict people on housing benefit, whether or not they've actually defaulted themselves?
We were talking about this before we went on air, and I have to say I find it very difficult because, you know, he's not the choir master. You know, he's not a Roman Catholic priest. He is a landlord with a gigantic and very valuable property empire, and he didn't go into this, you know, like someone working in a homeless charity. He went into it because it is a business. So on the one hand, I do understand that. On the other hand, I do feel very uncomfortable with the thought that, you know, these people, you know, on 0 hours or whatever else, are getting yet another battering for what they represent.
What do you think of it, Chris?
I'm still trying to work out how you can humanely evict someone because they're on housing benefit. I mean, you know, I agree with Adam, but, you know, it is a business, but, you know, if you have big high street lenders who are bending over backwards and people getting into arrears on their mortgage, and you compare that to the rental market, victimising someone because they're on housing benefit, I'm a bit gobsmacked.
That's an interesting word, victimising. Victimising people just because, I mean, people are on housing benefit who work, people who do low-income but important jobs.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
How do you feel when you've evicted somebody? I mean, I know you say you don't meet them, which presumably makes it easier, but do you sleep at night after you've evicted a family?
Well, I probably don't know they've been evicted, and I make the point to you that only 10% of those that we actually gave the notices to ended up with eviction. The other 90% had gone beforehand. I'm totally
That's still an eviction. They just went willingly and didn't go to court, did they?
That describes it very well, yes.
But I suppose this happens in, you know, other forms. I mean, I'm sure occasionally the BBC make people redundant. Now, that is a real family finding suddenly that it doesn't have an income. So, I don't know, maybe we have to see this in terms of unpleasant, hard economic reality.
Right, so let's not just talk about Fergus's situation, but come in on this one as well, Fergus, because I'm wondering if tenants need more protection, because in addition to what Chris perceives as victimisation, we've got this issue, this growing problem of what's called revenge eviction. So a tenant says to their landlord, there's mould on the wall, the kitchen cabinet's falling down, can you fix it? The next thing they know, they've got their, is it Section 21, their eviction notice? Mm-hmm. The landlord tells them they've got 8 weeks to get out. Now, this is an interesting one because there was going to be a bill to sort this out, and it was talked down in the Commons recently by two of your colleagues, two Conservative MPs.
Well, you better get them on the programme, I don't know nothing
Well,
about
were you in the Commons that day? No. Was it not important enough to be there?
It was important, yeah, but I have other things in my diary.
Well, it's due to come back. It's due to come back in January. Would you support it?
I don't know. I'd have to look at what the details were. But, I mean, I've no doubt in my patch that absolutely does happen. You'll have people who are... I mean, I'm thinking now specifically of one young woman who's living in really terrible accommodation, literally with you know, sort of fungus ears growing, you know, in the corner on the carpet. And she's had endless problems with the landlord. And of course, the people who tend to be in these very, very bad bits of accommodation are people who've often got other problems anyway. So of course, it's incredibly unhelpful for them.
Well, the worst case scenario is homelessness, isn't it? Somebody's evicted and they don't have a home to go to. And Fergus, you don't know because you don't know them. If that happens, Adam, you famously made a documentary about homelessness. You spent months on the streets. What's it like?
I did. I spent 3 months living on the streets of London a while ago. I know it was 3 months. I didn't cheat. I lived in doorways or under plastic in a park or in bail hostels and things. And I suppose the thing that really struck me about it is the people who were there with me, they all had other problems. It wasn't a case that, you know, people like us with jobs lost their jobs, lost their wives, lost their homes and ended up homeless. It was people on the streets. They were mentally ill, they were personality disordered, they were drug addicts, they were alcoholics, or they had learning difficulties. And that was, I think, the thing that sort of shocked me most, really. I remember seeing this guy in the Strand literally drinking water from a puddle like a dog, and hundreds of people just walked past him, hundreds and hundreds. And I think that in a society like ours, the state tries to look after, you know, an enormous percentage of the population, and yet historically we seem unable to look after the people in the very, very worst conditions.
I want very quickly to ask if it's different now. Looking at the town where you live in Crawley, is homelessness different from the homelessness that Adam Holloway described?
There's similarities, but I'm a trustee of Crawley Open House, which is a homeless shelter in Crawley, and we work very hard on moving people on. And I agree with Adam to a point, but there's also, you know, I've met people in the homeless shelter that, you know, average they've had a divorce, they've lost their house because of the divorce, and they're homeless, they had no family. So it can affect anyone at any time, and this is the scary thing. I mean, Crawley Open House turned away 2,500 people.
Yeah, I was talking about street homeless.
Yes.
And of course, there's lots of other homelessness. You know, this thing about sofa surfing and everything.
Yeah.
So absolutely.
Yeah. Fergus, thank you. Really nice to talk to you. Thank you for coming in and explaining your situation. Now, Bill Shankly once said football is a simple game complicated by people who should know better. Surely he didn't mean politicians. At the moment, both Labour and the Tories are getting stuck in, with the Reds and the Blues hoping to score votes by getting you, the fans, more involved in the running of your club. But here in the South East, that idea has been kicked around for a while. Sarah Neville's been looking over the results so far.
non-league Lewes FC versus Bury Town at the Dripping Pan last Wednesday. This may not be top-flight football, but Lewes is a successful example of a club owned by the fans, 1,000 of them.
The club was 24 hours away from being wound up in the High Court for debts, and then we spent 9 months, I think, in total, turning it into a community-owned football club because we had to do an awful lot of trust building, I think, and getting people to understand what the model was, getting us to understand what the model was, to be honest with you. And even now, 4.5 years later, we're kind of getting the hang of it, I would say. But it's been a fantastic thing to have done. It's really changed the club.
For fans, football's all about the game, but we all know that it's also big business, often attracting wealthy investors who control the running of the club. That can lead fans who pay high ticket prices to feel alienated. But now politicians want to address that disconnect, and it's a debate that's gaining momentum in Westminster.
Both Labour and the Tories say they want to tackle ways to get more fans into the boardroom at professional clubs and tighten up football governance. Recently, Sports Minister and Maidstone MP Helen Grant held an initial meeting with soccer authorities, including the Premier League, the FA and the Football League, exploring ways to encourage more fan ownership. Meanwhile, Labour propose radical plans for supporters to have seats on every board and the right to buy a slice of shares. Just 4 clubs in the Football League are wholly owned by supporters' trusts. And in the South East, there are 3 notable non-league clubs. Kent's Tunbridge Angels are the most recent addition, with shares due to go on sale next year.
I think from a fan's point of view, if you've got a multi-millionaire bankrolling you, it's great when the times are good. It's when they leave, when they've had enough. They walk away and someone's got to pick up the pieces. And I think we're looking for long-term sustainability and hopefully growth as well.
But fan ownership doesn't always work. Ebbsfleet United attempted another supporter-based model, an online share scheme with 35,000 members. It failed, and the club is now in the hands of a wealthy foreign owner.
The biggest frustration was having to circulate 35,000 people before you bought a pencil. And that could take up to 1 or 2 months. Now you have to make instant decisions in the beautiful game, and pretty quick. And it started, not to work.
Do you think Ebbsfleet United would ever go back to fan ownership?
No.
Supporters Direct are part of the government's expert group.
There are some serious problems that politicians have attempted to grapple with over and over again and have never seen through to the final conclusions, and that's the sort of missing piece, is that there's some changes that are required that just are continually resisted. We have made enormous strides in what we do. I do think politicians are going to have to make far more, be far more responsive to what we're asking for, and we're going to have to be far more persistent.
Back at the match, and it's a 1-0 win for Lewes. But the question still remains, will these political proposals win votes next year?
Chris Oxlade first. Is it for politicians to preach about how a football club should be owned?
Well, I think fans, go through support clubs through thick and thin, and it's actually the fans that care. And as you heard in the film there, that owners can come and go, and it's the fans that stay there the whole time. And it's really important to give fans a voice, not just on the board, but actually with the shares of the club as well. And he said,
But you heard that frustration when you've got to ask 200,000 people if you can buy a pencil or whatever it is.
Well, no, but things like that you can work through. The principle is that fans have a right to say, who their club sponsor is, if the stadium name gets changed, and it's making sure there's people like Clive Efford MP and also Andrew Pope down in the New Forest East, who's the parliamentary candidate, done immense work speaking to 95 different supporters clubs right across the country. I hate to say the Conservatives only spoke to 3, but they've done a sterling job and actually got the fans and the supporters clubs on board.
Well, you were obviously personally involved in this, weren't you, Adam? Because you had a share in everything.
Yeah, I actually hate football. I've just never understood why anyone would want to spend their afternoon watching it. But when I came to Gravesend, there was this amazing thing where tens of thousands of people were paying £35. So I did it, and I have to say I really enjoyed it. It culminated in the Conference League final at Wembley, and after the match I was wandering around the sort of bit at the bottom, and there were hundreds of people that I knew from Gravesend and Northfleet and the villages, And apparently there were about 24,000 supporters of Ebbsfleet there that day. And I sat there, I stood there, and I just looked at all these people and I thought, this is the most men who've been out of Gravesend since World War II on a single day. I mean, it was an amazing thing.
So it's not owned by you, the fans, anymore.
And
it didn't work out in Ebbsfleet.
Well, I think the problem was that I think one of a manager decided that he didn't want to be told what team he was going to pick, and I think they lost some remarkable footballers.
Isn't there an argument, Chris, that fans should just be fans, if they're real fans, as opposed to Adam, who just kind of jumped on the bandwagon?
I wasn't jumping on the bandwagon. I really wasn't. I was fascinated by it.
Should they?
I'd be jumping on the bandwagon if I told you, oh, yes, I love football. I've been very honest with you.
Still hate football. Should fans just be fans?
Well, there's an argument for that, but, you know, I'm quite happy if you want to come to see Crawley Town. We'll get you into football, Adam.
35 quid, yes.
It's a lot cheaper than Crawley.
Is it a lot cheaper? If Crawley Town went bust, though, would it be the end of the world?
Yeah, I think it was. I mean, it's the heart and soul of the town in some respects. You know, we've got a lot of fans that, you know, obviously from Crawley, but from outside the town as well that come in. It's good for the social side. It's good for the local economy, and it's something that we need to support.
OK. Time now for a roundup of the other political events you might have missed this week. Here's James Fitzgerald.
900 children in council care in Kent have gone missing at some point in the last 3 years. 50 asylum seekers disappeared completely. Experts are worried these children
attract a certain type of predator that will work on them over time, buy them gifts, give them cigarettes, alcohol.
Following protests, councillors in East Sussex have voted against cuts to bus services, but cabinet members will get the final say. Meanwhile, in Brighton and Hove, the Tories have refused to debate the ruling Green administration's proposals for a 5.9% council tax hike. Medway is pioneering a scheme which allows people to ban themselves from its many betting shops, who are now offering problem gamblers
very, very, very strong tools, and self-exclusion is the best.
And in the Supreme Court, the police challenged a ruling that John Catt, a peace activist from Brighton, could be removed from the extremism database.
At nearly 90 years old, I still don't see myself as a danger to the state.
So, council tax and cuts there in our review of the week. Just a very quick thought. The IFS says colossal cuts to come. We haven't seen anything yet, have we, Chris?
No, and that's the worrying trend at the moment. You're talking about tens of billions of pounds of cuts, depending which source you believe. But, you know, it's a worrying time.
Well, really quick thought, Adam, will we recognise that the state...
Do you know how much we're borrowing every day as a country? Do you know?
I don't. It's billions, isn't it? Millions, if not billions.
Yeah, it's 300. I think 330 million.
So what you're saying is brace yourself because we need these
330 million pounds a day. I mean, I think it's immoral to borrow at that level and expect our great-great-great-grandchildren to pay, but where you make the cuts, heaven knows. OK, I'm sure we'll be talking that in the months to come. Thank you. Really nice to have you both with us. That was Adam Holloway and Chris Oxlade. And it's Natalie, back next week with more politics in the South East. Bye for now.